Hi guys, welcome back to Book Fuel English. I am truly grateful that you are here, holding this book, giving your time and your heart to a simple story. Let's learn English together through a story, not with pressure or rules, but with feeling, memory, and quiet understanding. This book is called The Days She Never Spoke About. It is not loud, it does not rush. It moves slowly like real life. It is written in simple language because the deepest emotions do not need difficult words. If English is not your first language, please do not worry. Read gently. Feel more than you understand. That is enough. This story matters because many of us grow up surrounded by love we do not fully see. Someone cooks for us, waits for us, listens to us, and carries our worries in silence. We think they will always be there. We think there will always be another day to talk, another day to say thank you, another day to ask how they really feel. Sometimes that day never comes. This book is for anyone who has loved quietly and for anyone who was loved quietly. It is for the mother who never complained, the grandmother who smiled through pain, the teacher who believed without praise, and the reader who was too busy to notice. It is also for those who feel regret, guilt, or a soft ache when they remember someone from their past. As you read, you may smile, you may feel warm, and later you may feel tears. If your heart feels heavy, it is okay to pause. Close the book. Breathe. Come back when you are ready. This is not a race. This is a shared moment. Today's moral is not given at the beginning. It will grow quietly inside you as the story moves forward. My hope is simple. After this book, you will speak more gently, listen more deeply, and hold your loved ones a little longer. I hope this story becomes a quiet companion for you. Read it at night, or in silence, or when you miss someone you cannot call anymore. Let the words sit with you. If one sentence stays in your heart, then this book has done its job. That is the only purpose I truly wish for when writing this story here. Thank you for trusting Book Fuel English. Let us begin slowly together. Chapter 1. Ordinary Mornings. Ordinary mornings were never meant to be remembered. They arrived quietly without asking for attention and passed the same way. The day usually began before the sun fully woke, when the house was still wrapped in a soft gray light. The air felt cool and the world seemed slower, as if it was stretching before another long day. These mornings were simple, almost invisible, and that was why they felt safe. She was always awake first. The quiet giver moved through the house with careful steps, as if she did not want to disturb the walls themselves. She opened the window just a little, letting in fresh air and the faint sound of birds. Then she went to the kitchen, where the kettle waited, patient and familiar. Water was poured, the flame was lit. Steam slowly rose, gentle and steady. The protagonist usually woke later, carried out of sleep by the smell of tea or the quiet sound of movement. There was no rush, no loud alarm, just the feeling that someone else had already begun the day, so they did not have to. When they stepped into the kitchen, their hair was messy and their thoughts still half asleep. "Good morning," she would say, always the same way. "Morning," the protagonist replied, often while rubbing tired eyes. Those words felt complete enough. Nothing more was needed. Sunlight slipped through the window and landed on the table, warming the surface where two cups were placed. One cup was always filled first. She pushed it gently across the table, closer to the protagonist, even if she had not yet sat down herself. This small act happened every day, so often that it stopped feeling like a gift. It became part of the air, something expected, something unnoticed. She sat across from them, hands wrapped around her own cup, eyes calm, face relaxed. Sometimes she asked a simple question. Did you sleep well? Do you have plans today? Have some more bread? These questions were not meant to start deep conversations. They were bridges, light and easy, meant only to connect the morning to the rest of the day. The protagonist answered without thinking much. Yes, not sure. Maybe later. Their mind was already moving forward, planning tasks, worrying about time, counting responsibilities. They did not notice how carefully she listened, how her eyes stayed on their face, as if every ordinary answer mattered. Breakfast was never fancy, a slice of bread, a small bowl of fruit, a quiet hum from the radio that played old songs no one really listened to anymore. She liked that sound. It filled the silence without demanding attention. It made the kitchen feel alive. Sometimes she smiled at nothing in particular. Sometimes she watched the sunlight as if it was telling her a story. If she felt pain, she never let it stay on her face for long. She stood up slowly, washed the cups, wiped the table, and moved on. The work seemed endless, but she never named it that way. The protagonist often checked the time. They gathered their bag, their phone, their thoughts. Life waited outside, loud and busy. She noticed this too. She always did. That was why she said very little. She knew mornings were not for holding people back. Eat well, she said. I will, the protagonist answered. They believed it was true. Before leaving, there was always a pause at the door. Not a meaningful one, just a moment where shoes were tied or keys were found. She stood nearby, pretending to fix something, pretending not to wait. Sometimes she reached out and brushed dust from a shoulder. Sometimes she said nothing at all. See you later, the protagonist said. She nodded. Be careful. The door closed. The sound echoed softly through the house. She remained still for a moment longer than necessary, listening until footsteps faded away. Then she returned to the kitchen and finished her tea, now lukewarm, now quiet. These mornings repeated themselves again and again. Nothing dramatic ever happened. No big words were spoken. No promises were made. That was the mistake. The love lived in the space between actions, in the things done without being asked, in the silence that felt comfortable instead of empty. To the protagonist, these mornings were simply part of life. They did not write them down. They did not save them in memory. They assumed they would always be there, waiting like the kettle, patient and warm. But love that is always present becomes invisible, and the safest days are often the ones we forget first. Ordinary mornings pass gently, carrying more meaning than anyone realized, holding everything that would one day be missed, long after the sunlight stopped falling across the table. On some mornings the weather changed, but the rhythm did not. Rain tapped softly against the window, or clouds covered the sky, turning the kitchen dim and blue. She adjusted without comment. A thicker sweater, hotter tea, an extra moment near the stove where warmth gathered. She never spoke about the cold in her bones or the tiredness in her arms. She only adjusted as she always had. There were habits she carried for years, habits older than the house itself. She folded napkins the same way each time. She placed the spoon on the right side of the cup. She cleaned the counter even when it was already clean. These were not rules written anywhere. They were quiet promises she made to herself. Promises that said life should feel steady even when the world outside was not. The protagonist did not ask where she learned these habits. They did not wonder how many mornings she had lived before theirs began. To them, she had always been there, already formed, already strong. It never crossed their mind that she too once woke up unsure, afraid, or lonely. Sometimes, on rare mornings, the protagonist sat a little longer. Maybe they were not in a hurry. Maybe something inside them slowed down. On those days, she spoke a little more. She told small stories that did not seem important. A neighbor she once knew, a recipe she learned long ago, a memory from a time the protagonist could not imagine clearly. They listened, but not deeply. They smiled politely. The stories felt distant, like old photographs without names. They did not know that these moments were openings, gentle invitations to see her fully. They did not know that one day they would search their memory for these stories and find only pieces. When the morning finally ended, she cleaned the last cup and dried her hands on a faded towel. The house grew quiet again. The radio played to no one. The sunlight moved slowly across the floor, changing shape, changing color. She sat down for a moment, breathing carefully, resting without naming it as rest. Ordinary mornings asked for nothing and gave everything. They built love without noise. They held two lives together in the simplest ways. And because they felt so normal, no one thought to hold them tightly. They slipped past one by one, becoming memories before anyone realized they were precious. They seemed endless. Chapter 2. The Sound of Her Laughter. Her laughter was never loud. It did not fill the room or draw attention. It arrived softly, like a small bell ringing somewhere close, gentle enough that you could miss it if you were not listening. That was how it had always been. Her laughter did not ask to be noticed. It simply existed, warm and brief, leaving behind a feeling that stayed longer than the sound itself. She laughed at small things, a misplaced word, a spoon dropped on the floor, a memory that returned without warning. Sometimes the joke was hardly a joke at all. It was more like a shared understanding between two people who had lived together long enough to find humor in silence. The protagonist often smiled in response, sometimes without fully knowing why. "Do you remember when you were little?" she asked one morning, her eyes bright with memory. The protagonist shrugged. "Not really." She laughed then softly. "That makes sense," she said. "I remember enough for both of us." There was no sadness in her voice when she said this, only acceptance, as if carrying memories for two people was a natural thing, as easy as breathing. She spoke about the past in pieces, never telling full stories, never insisting they be heard. A sentence here, a detail there. She did not seem to mind when the protagonist listened only halfway. Sometimes her laughter came with a shake of her head, as if she was amused by life itself. She laughed at old habits that never changed, at mistakes that had already passed, at days that did not go as planned. Even when she was tired, even when her hands moved more slowly than before, laughter found her easily. The protagonist noticed this, but not deeply. They thought of it as part of who she was, like the color of her eyes or the way she folded clothes. They did not stop to wonder why laughter still came so quickly, or what it cost her to keep it that way. There were afternoons when the house felt heavy with quiet. On those days, she found reasons to laugh on purpose. She teased gently. She repeated old jokes that were no longer funny, just familiar. She laughed at herself when she forgot something simple. The sound of it lifted the air, just enough to make the silence feel friendly again. "You don't have to laugh at that," the protagonist once said. "I know," she replied, smiling, "but it feels better when I do." That answer stayed for a moment, then slipped away, unnoticed. Her laughter held memories inside it. Each soft sound carried years of living, of choosing kindness over bitterness, of deciding again and again not to let life harden her. But none of that was visible. What people saw was only the surface. A woman who smiled easily, someone who made things lighter without trying. The protagonist often laughed with her, but their laughter was different. It was quick, distracted, already thinking of something else. They laughed while checking their phone. They laughed while standing up to leave. They laughed, but they did not stay. Shared memories lived between them, but they were uneven. She remembered the exact day of a childhood fall, the color of the sky, the fear in the protagonist's eyes. The protagonist remembered only that it happened, that it was long ago, that it no longer mattered. When she laughed about those moments, it was not because they were funny. It was because they were proof of closeness, proof that time had once moved slowly enough to notice everything. Sometimes she laughed alone. The protagonist heard it from another room and wondered what caused it. They did not ask. It felt unimportant. She laughed quietly while folding laundry, while washing dishes, while watching the world through the window. Her laughter was a companion she carried with her, even when no one was listening. There were days when her laughter sounded thinner, like it had traveled a long way before reaching the surface. On those days, she paused afterward, just for a second, as if catching her breath. The protagonist saw this and thought nothing of it. Everyone gets tired, they told themselves. Everyone slows down. The warmth her laughter created was real. It softened sharp edges. It made hard days easier. It reminded the protagonist, without words, that home was a place where mistakes were allowed and where nothing had to be perfect. But warmth can be dangerous when it feels permanent. It can make people careless. One evening, as the light faded and the house grew quiet, she laughed at something small the protagonist said without thinking. The laughter surprised them. It lingered in the air longer than usual, gentle and familiar. For a brief moment, the protagonist felt a strange urge to stop, to stay, to look at her more closely. But the moment passed. Life moved forward, as it always did. Her laughter continued to appear in ordinary places, carrying comfort without asking for attention. It wrapped itself around the days, stitching moments together so smoothly that no one noticed the thread. And because it was always there, because it never demanded anything in return, the protagonist assumed it always would be. They did not know that one day silence would arrive where laughter once lived, and that they would search their memory for this sound, wishing they had paused long enough to truly hear it, wishing they had understood what a gift it was, while it still echoed gently through their shared days. Chapter 3, Small Things She Always Did. She did many small things every day, so many that no one counted them. They blended together, quiet and steady, forming the background of life itself. Cooking, folding clothes, waiting up late, remembering details that others forgot. These acts did not arrive as gestures of love. They arrived as habits. And because they were habits, they were expected. She cooked without asking what anyone wanted. She already knew. Less salt, more soup, food cut into smaller pieces, even when no one noticed. She stood by the stove longer than necessary, tasting, adjusting, making sure everything felt right. When the meal was ready, she served others first. She ate later, sometimes standing, sometimes forgetting she was hungry at all. The protagonist never thanked her properly, not because they were unkind, but because the food was always there. Warm plates appeared on the table the way mornings appeared on the calendar, naturally, without question. Gratitude faded when comfort became routine. After meals, she folded clothes with care. Each shirt smooth flat. Each pair of socks matched correctly. She remembered which fabric scratched the skin, which one felt soft. She folded slowly, her fingers knowing the shape of each garment by heart. The work took time, but she never rushed it. Order made her feel calm. Providing order made her feel useful. The protagonist passed by, barely noticing. Clean clothes returned to their place like magic. Drawers refilled themselves. The effort behind it remained invisible. At night, she waited up, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes she sat with a book she did not read. Sometimes she watched television without sound. Sometimes she simply listened to the clock. She waited because waiting felt safer than sleeping. Waiting meant being ready. When the door finally opened, no matter how late, she pretended she had just been passing by. "You're home," she said, as if it was a casual thing, as if she had not been counting minutes. The protagonist replied with a tired smile and went to bed, unaware that someone else rested only after they did. She remembered details others forgot: appointments, preferences, small fears spoken once and never mentioned again. She remembered the protagonist's favorite childhood snack, even when it was no longer asked for. She remembered stories better than the people who lived them. Memory lived inside her like a second heart, beating quietly, faithfully. Sometimes she reminded the protagonists of things they had promised themselves. Eat better, sleep more, call someone, be careful. The reminders were gentle, never demanding. She never said, "I worry." She said, "Just remember." The protagonist listened politely, sometimes impatiently. Advice felt unnecessary. Concern felt excessive. After all, she had always been there, always fine, always steady. She cleaned even when nothing looked dirty. She adjusted pillows. She closed doors softly. She turned off lights no one else noticed were on. These were not chores to her. They were ways of caring for a space that held the people she loved. Her body felt the cost of these small things, but she never named it. She did not complain about her back, her knees, her breath growing shorter. Pain was handled quietly, privately, as if speaking it out loud might burden someone else. She smiled instead. Smiling felt lighter. The protagonist assumed this strength was endless. They believed she was made of something stronger than ordinary people. They never imagined her waking up tired of being strong. They never asked what she needed, because she never asked for anything. On days when she was clearly exhausted, she still found something to do. Rest made her uncomfortable. Sitting still felt like failing. She believed love meant action, and action meant staying useful. Once, when the protagonist offered to help, she shook her head. "It's okay," she said, and that was the end of it. The offer was forgotten. The habit continued. These small things built a life that felt safe. They created the illusion that nothing would ever fall apart. Because when someone always holds things together, others forget that holding takes effort. Nothing felt special then. That was the mistake. The protagonist did not mark these moments. They did not store them carefully. They assumed repetition meant permanence. They assumed tomorrow would look the same as today. The small things were too common to treasure, but love often hides in repetition. It lives in the acts done without applause, without witnesses, without thanks. It survives in waiting, remembering, preparing, and enduring. She never asked to be seen. She never demanded appreciation. She only continued day after day, filling the spaces others left empty. And because she did it so quietly, the protagonist never realized that these small things were the foundation of everything they called home. They did not understand that one day, the silence left behind by these missing habits would be louder than any argument, heavier than any loss. At the time, it all felt normal, comfortable, expected, and that was why it hurt later. Chapter 4: A Life That Felt Secure. For a long time, life felt secure in a way the protagonist never questioned. Days followed one another with gentle predictability. Mornings began with familiar sounds. Evenings ended with quiet certainty. Nothing seemed fragile. Nothing appeared urgent. Life felt like a long road stretching forward without an ending. The protagonist believed this rhythm would last forever, not because they had thought deeply about it, but because they had never needed to think otherwise. Security is invisible when it is complete. It feels less like protection and more like air. You do not notice it until something changes. Time moved slowly in those years. Weeks blended into months, months into years. Birthdays arrived, were acknowledged, and passed without much reflection. Seasons changed, but the house remained the same. The quiet giver stayed where she always was, anchoring each day in place. Her presence made the future feel safe, already arranged. Love in that space felt guaranteed. It did not require effort or attention. It was simply there, waiting. The protagonist assumed love worked like that for everyone, that it stayed steady no matter how little you looked at it. There was no fear of losing it, because losing it had never crossed their mind. Plans were made easily, dreams were spoken without worry. The protagonist imagined a future filled with movement and growth, travel and change. In every version of that future, the quiet giver existed quietly in the background, unchanged by time. She was never pictured growing older. She was never pictured leaving. When people spoke about loss, the protagonist listened with polite distance. Those stories belonged to other families, other lives. Their own world felt protected, sealed off from such endings. Tragedy felt like something dramatic and loud, something that announced itself clearly. Nothing in their daily life suggested that quiet things could disappear. Even moments of tension passed quickly. Arguments ended softly. Hard days were smoothed out by routine. There was always tomorrow, always another chance to talk, to ask, to notice. The idea of later felt endless and forgiving. The quiet giver never challenged this belief. She never warned the protagonist to slow down or pay attention. She did not speak about time or its limits. Her silence made security feel stronger. If she was not worried, why should anyone else be? Sometimes the protagonist felt a brief flicker of unease, a moment when they noticed her sitting more slowly or resting longer than before. But the feeling passed quickly. Everyone ages, they told themselves. Everyone gets tired. There was no reason to worry yet. yet never arrived. Life continued to feel safe because someone else carried the weight of uncertainty. The quiet giver absorbed the fear, the waiting, the unspoken knowledge that nothing lasts forever. She held it quietly, allowing the protagonist to live freely, unburdened by awareness. The protagonist moved forward with confidence. They invested their energy in the outside world, trusting that home would remain unchanged. Love waited patiently, they believed, ready whenever they had time to return to it. This belief shaped everything. It made goodbyes shorter. It made conversations lighter. It made attention shallow. Why look closely at something you believe will always be there? Security can be a gift, but it can also be a veil. It hides the slow work of love, the effort of care, the fragile nature of presence. It convinces people that the most important things are permanent when they are not. At the time, the protagonist felt lucky. Life felt kind. The world felt stable. Love felt infinite. There was no reason to rush, no reason to hold moments tightly. They did not know that this sense of safety was borrowed time. They did not know that one day they would wish they had treated ordinary days with more reverence, more attention, more care. For now, everything felt secure, and because it felt secure, it felt unbreakable. Chapter 5. When life became busy. Life did not become busy all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, the way shadows move across a wall. One small change followed another until the days felt fuller and the hours felt thinner. The protagonist did not notice the moment when now began to feel inconvenient and later began to feel safer. Work arrived first, not just work, but responsibility, expectations, the feeling of needing to move forward, to build something meaningful in the world outside the house. Mornings became shorter, evenings became tired. Thoughts were filled with plans, deadlines, and worries that followed them home. The quiet giver watched this change without comment. She adjusted the rhythm of the house as if it were natural, as if this was how things were always meant to be. Breakfast appeared earlier. Dinners waited longer. Silence filled the spaces where conversations once lived. The protagonist started saying things like, "I'll tell you later," and "we'll talk another time." The words were not meant to hurt. They were practical, efficient, temporary. Later felt close enough to touch, close enough to trust, but later has a way of moving. Dreams grew louder inside the protagonist. There were goals to reach, paths to follow, versions of life that felt exciting and important. These dreams demanded attention. They asked for sacrifice. Time was the first thing given away. The quiet giver did not resist this. She never asked for more. She never reminded the protagonist of how things used to be. She understood dreams. She had once had her own, though she no longer spoke about them. Supporting someone else's future felt like purpose enough. When the protagonist came home late, she waited without complaint. When meals went cold, she reheated them quietly. When days passed without long conversations, she filled the silence with routine. She adapted because adapting was what she had always done. The house changed in small ways. Lights stayed off longer. The radio played less often. Chairs remained empty. These changes were subtle, easy to ignore. The protagonist noticed them only in passing, as details without meaning. They spoke more about schedules than feelings, about tasks instead of thoughts. Conversations became shorter, lighter, more functional. The protagonist believed this was normal. a natural stage of life. Growing meant moving outward, they told themselves. The quiet giver listened. She always listened. She nodded, smiled, offered encouragement. She never said she missed the old mornings or the unhurried evenings. Missing something felt selfish. She preferred to make space. Sometimes she prepared food that was never eaten. Sometimes she waited with the light on until it grew late, then turned it off herself. She learned the sound of keys at different hours, learned to recognize tired footsteps from hopeful ones. She learned these things quietly without expecting acknowledgement. The protagonist noticed her less, not out of cruelty, but because attention was limited. There were too many things asking for it at once. The quiet giver did not compete. She stepped back instead. There were moments when the protagonist felt a gentle tug inside, a sense that something was being left behind. On those days, they considered staying longer, sitting down, asking a real question. But something always interrupted. A message, a thought, a sense of urgency that felt important at the time. Later, they thought, there will be time later. The quiet giver heard that word often. Later, soon, tomorrow. She accepted it with grace. She believed in patience. She believed love did not need to be rushed. She believed understanding meant waiting. She filled her days with quiet tasks, cleaning things that were already clean, preparing for moments that might never come. These tasks gave shape to time, gave her a reason to keep moving when stillness felt too heavy. The protagonist's life expanded. New people entered it. New routines formed. The world outside grew larger and louder. Home became a place to return to, not a place to stay. Still, the quiet giver remained. She adjusted her expectations without speaking them aloud. She celebrated small successes privately. She worried silently. She carried concern the way others carry bags, always without setting it down. When the protagonist apologized for being busy, she waved it away. It's okay, she said, meaning it. She did not want guilt to be part of their relationship. Love to her was meant to lighten, not weigh down. But love also requires presence, and presence was becoming rare. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The pattern settled in. Busy became normal. Distance became familiar. The protagonists felt proud of their progress, satisfied with movement. They did not see what their movement cost someone else. The quiet giver adapted so well that her absence from conversations felt natural. Her silence blended into the background. She became part of the structure of life, like furniture, like walls, always there, easily overlooked. She never asked the protagonist to choose her over their dreams. She never asked them to slow down. She believed that love meant letting go, even if letting go hurt. The protagonists believed they were doing what they were supposed to do, building a future, becoming independent, growing. They trusted that the past would wait for them. They did not realize that while they were choosing later again and again, now was quietly slipping away, carrying with it the chance to see, to listen, and to stay just a little longer. Chapter 6. Conversations that became shorter. Conversations did not disappear suddenly. They slowly became smaller, like rivers drying one quiet day at a time. At first, nothing felt wrong. Words were still exchanged. Questions were still asked. But something had changed in their shape, their weight, their willingness to stay. The quiet giver used to ask open questions. How was your day? What are you thinking about? What made you smile today? These questions once invited stories. They invited pauses. They invited presence. Over time, they softened into simpler forms. Did you eat? Are you tired? Do you need anything? The protagonist answered quickly. Yes, fine. No. The answers were honest, but incomplete. They were shaped by hurry, not by care. Conversation became something to move through, not something to rest inside. She noticed this shift immediately. She always did, but she did not resist it. She adjusted her expectations instead. If questions no longer opened doors, she would not knock as often. She learned to listen more than she spoke, to wait for moments that might never arrive. The protagonist often spoke while standing, already halfway toward another task. Words were shared while checking messages, tying shoes, thinking ahead. Conversations became something that happened alongside life, not within it. She listened carefully anyway. She always did. Even when stories were rushed, she paid attention to tone, to pauses, to what was not said. She learned to read exhaustion between sentences, stress behind jokes, worry hidden beneath confidence. Sometimes she responded with only a nod or a soft sound of understanding. She knew longer replies might slow things down, and she did not want to be an obstacle. Silence felt kinder. The house grew quieter, but not in an uncomfortable way. It was a gentle quiet, filled with familiar sounds. The clock ticking, water running, a chair moving slightly across the floor. Silence became a shared space rather than an empty one. The protagonist did not feel the loss of conversation. They felt efficient, productive. Life felt full. They believed connection could wait, that depth could be returned to later when things calmed down. The quiet giver did not argue with this belief. She carried patience like a habit. She had learned long ago that forcing words only made people pull away. So she waited, trusting that time would bring space again. There were moments when she almost spoke, when a thought rose to her lips and paused there. A memory, a concern, a feeling she could not name, but she swallowed it gently, choosing quiet instead. Quiet felt safer than interruption. She became skilled at this silence. She filled it with small movements, with care that did not require conversation. Folding clothes, preparing tea, sitting nearby without asking for attention. Presence without pressure. The protagonist sometimes noticed her watching them, her eyes thoughtful, calm. They mistook this for contentment. They assumed silence meant peace. They did not ask what lived behind it. Fewer questions were asked now. Not because curiosity was gone, but because the rhythm of life did not allow for wandering answers. Everything needed to be efficient. Everything needed to move forward. When the quiet giver spoke, her words were chosen carefully. She did not want to waste them. She shared only what felt necessary, what felt light enough to carry. Heavy thoughts stayed inside her, folded away like clothes saved for special occasions. The protagonist answered with speed and confidence. They believed clarity was strength. They did not notice that certainty left little room for reflection, little room for shared wondering. Silence stretched between them more often. Not awkward, not tense, just present. It wrapped itself around daily life, becoming familiar. The quiet giver grew comfortable inside it, even as it made her lonelier. Sometimes she missed the old conversations, the long ones that wandered without direction, the ones where questions led to stories, and stories led to laughter, and laughter filled the room. She missed being asked what she thought, not just what she needed. But she did not speak this longing aloud. Longing felt selfish. She believed love meant accepting what was given, not asking for more. The protagonist believed the connection was still strong. After all, nothing had broken. There were no arguments, no harsh words, no dramatic distance. Everything felt calm. That calm was misleading. Silence can grow gently, the way dust settles on furniture, slowly, quietly, until one day you realize how much has been covered. The quiet giver continued to listen. She listened to footsteps, to breathing, to the small signs of stress in the protagonist's voice. She learned their moods without being told. She adapted without complaint. The protagonist continued forward, trusting that closeness did not need maintenance, that it could survive on memory alone. They believed shared history was enough. Neither of them named the change. Naming it would have required stopping, and stopping felt impossible. So conversations grew shorter, answers grew faster, silence grew wider. And within that gentle quiet, something important began to fade, unnoticed, unmarked, waiting for a moment that might never come. Chapter 7, Signs That Went Unnoticed. The signs did not arrive loudly. They came quietly, like soft knocks that were easy to ignore. Fatigue showed itself first, not as complaint, but as pauses. The quiet giver moved a little slower than before. She rested her hands on the table for a moment longer. She sat down more often, even when there was still work left to do. The protagonist noticed these things. They saw the way she breathed more carefully after climbing the stairs. They noticed how she sometimes forgot to eat until the food grew cold. They saw her smile linger a second too long, as if it needed effort to stay in place. But noticing is not the same as understanding. She's just tired, the protagonist thought. Everyone gets tired. The thought felt reasonable, comforting. It allowed life to continue without interruption. Meals were skipped more often now. She claimed she was not hungry. She said she ate earlier. She said she would eat later. The same word returned again and again. Later. The protagonist accepted these answers easily. Hunger felt temporary. Everything felt temporary. There were moments when she paused in the middle of a task, her eyes unfocused, her body still. The pause was brief, almost invisible. She always recovered quickly, brushing it away with a smile or a small joke. The protagonist watched these pauses and felt a faint concern, like a distant sound they could not quite place. "Are you okay?" they asked once. "I'm fine," she answered immediately, too quickly. The smile came right after. The conversation ended there. Pain, when it appeared, was disguised carefully. She rubbed her wrist and said it was nothing. She pressed her back and said she slept wrong. She waved away concern as if it were unnecessary attention. Pain was treated as a private matter, something not meant to be shared. The protagonist respected this boundary without questioning it. Independence was something they valued. They assumed she wanted the same. Her smiles remained, but they changed slightly. They became gentler, thinner, like light passing through clouds. They appeared when needed and disappeared just as quickly. The protagonist saw the change and chose not to name it. Naming it would have required stopping, and stopping felt inconvenient. Some days she seemed quieter than usual. She listened more, spoke less. Silence suited her, or at least that was what the protagonist believed. They did not ask if silence was chosen or endured. There were missed meals, missed naps, missed moments of rest. She filled her days with movement, as if stillness might allow discomfort to surface. Being busy felt safer than being honest. The protagonist noticed her sitting alone more often, looking out the window, watching nothing in particular. These moments felt peaceful from the outside. They did not look like warning signs. They looked like rest. When she coughed, she covered it quickly. When her hands shook, she hid them in her lap. When fatigue pressed heavy on her shoulders, she straightened her back and continued. Strength to her meant not asking for help. The protagonist admired this strength. They believed it was part of who she was. They did not consider that strength could also be a shield, hiding vulnerability behind habit. There were days when she forgot small things, where she placed her glasses, what time it was, what she meant to say. She laughed these moments off, making light of them. I'm getting old, she joked. The protagonist laughed too, relieved by the humor, comforted by the normality of it. Old age explained everything. It made concern unnecessary. It made change acceptable. The signs continued: a longer rest in the afternoon, a smaller appetite, a heavier sigh when standing up. Each sign appeared alone, disconnected from the others. The protagonist saw them as separate moments, not as a pattern. Patterns require attention. Attention requires time. On rare occasions, the protagonist felt a sharper worry, a moment when fear brushed close enough to be felt. On those days, they considered insisting, asking harder questions, pushing past her smiles. But the fear was uncomfortable. It threatened the sense of safety they relied on. So they stepped back instead. They trusted her words. They trusted her smile. Trust felt easier than doubt. The quiet giver noticed this too. She saw the concern rise and fade in the protagonist's eyes. She was grateful for that. She did not want to be a burden. She believed love meant protecting others from worry, even if it meant carrying pain alone. She continued to adapt. She rested when no one was watching. She moved carefully when she thought she was alone. She saved her energy for moments that mattered to the protagonist. The signs were there, waiting to be understood. They were gentle, patient, almost kind. They did not demand attention. They simply existed. The protagonist noticed them, and then they dismissed them. Life continued forward, smooth and uninterrupted. No alarms sounded, no urgent moments arrived. Everything appeared manageable, and because everything appeared manageable, nothing changed. Later, the protagonist would remember these signs with painful clarity. They would replay the pauses, the missed meals, the tired smiles. They would wonder how they could have seen so much and understood so little. But at the time, it was easier to believe that everything was fine, easier to trust the surface, easier to keep moving. So the signs remained unnoticed, even as they stood quietly in plain sight, waiting for someone to stop long enough to truly see them. Chapter 8. Still Smiling. She was still smiling. That was the part that made everything feel fine. Even as days grew heavier and her body asked for rest more often, her smile remained gentle and familiar. It appeared easily, like it always had, softening rooms and calming moments. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing had changed. Her kindness did not fade. If anything, it became more careful. She spoke with patience. She listened without interruption. She noticed moods and needs before they were spoken. Kindness for her was instinct, not effort. It was the language she knew best. The protagonist found comfort in that smile. It reassured them. It told them that life was still stable, still safe. As long as she smiled, there was nothing to worry about. Smiles, they believed, were honest. She smiled when the protagonist came home late. She smiled when plans changed. She smiled when conversations ended quickly. The smile never accused. It never asked for more. It simply accepted. There was peace in the house because she created it. She smoothed rough edges before they became visible. She adjusted herself so others would not have to adjust around her. Peace to her was something you gave, not something you waited to receive. She still asked if the protagonist had eaten. She still reminded them to rest. She still celebrated small successes with quiet pride. Her voice stayed warm, her eyes attentive. Nothing in her behavior suggested urgency. The protagonist mistook peace for permanence. Some evenings, she sat quietly with her hands folded, watching the light change outside. She looked content, at rest. The scene felt complete, balanced, untouched by worry. The protagonist saw this and felt relieved. If she was calm, then everything must be fine. She smiled even when she was tired, especially then. Fatigue softened her features, but the smile remained, steady and practiced. It had lived on her face for so long that it felt natural, even when it cost her something. There were moments when the protagonist almost asked more, when they felt the urge to sit beside her, to look closely, to ask how she really felt. But the smile stopped those questions before they formed. Questions felt unnecessary. The smile answered everything. She continued to do kind things without being asked. Small gestures, thoughtful details, a cup of tea placed nearby, a light turned off to save energy, a blanket folded neatly at the edge of the chair. These acts felt peaceful, soothing, almost invisible. Peace can be misleading. It hides effort. It hides sacrifice. It hides the slow erosion of strength. She smiled when she forgot words. She smiled when her hands shook. She smiled when she needed to sit down suddenly. The smile came first, before explanation, before concern. It controlled the moment, guiding attention away from what might cause worry. The protagonist believed that kindness was proof of well-being. They believed smiles meant comfort, that gentleness meant health. They did not consider that kindness could also be a mask, worn not to deceive, but to protect. She did not want to disturb the balance of the house. She did not want to introduce fear. She believed fear was heavier than pain. So she chose smiles instead. The days passed quietly, wrapped in this gentle calm. Nothing dramatic occurred. No raised voices, no tears, no urgent conversations. Everything felt manageable, controlled, peaceful. This peace would later feel unbearable to remember, because within it lived 1,000 unspoken things. Every smile carried what she did not say. Every calm moment carried effort unseen. Every gentle act carried love that asked for nothing in return. The protagonist enjoyed these days. They felt grateful without knowing why. They felt safe without understanding the cost. Peace made them comfortable. Comfort made them careless. She smiled through it all, through missed meals, through restless nights, through moments when her body quietly asked for mercy. The smile became her way of staying present without becoming a problem. Sometimes when she thought no one was watching, the smile faded, only briefly, just long enough for exhaustion to show. Then it returned, practiced and kind, ready for the next moment. The protagonist rarely saw these cracks, and when they did, they looked away. Not out of cruelty, but out of trust. Trust that she would speak if something was wrong. Trust that smiles meant truth. She remained kind even when kindness required strength she no longer had. She believed love was proven by how little you asked for, not by how much you received. Later, the protagonist would remember this chapter of life as the calm before everything changed. They would remember how peaceful it felt, how normal, how safe. They would wonder how something so gentle could hide so much. At the time, the peace felt real. The smiles felt reassuring. Life felt stable. And that was why it hurt so deeply later. Because the quiet kindness, the steady smiles, the calm that wrapped around each day were not signs that everything was fine. They were signs of someone choosing love over truth, peace over honesty, and silence over asking for help. Still, she smiled, and the world believed her. Chapter 9. Something Feels Different. The feeling arrived without a name. It did not announce itself or demand attention. It settled quietly, like a thin layer of dust on familiar surfaces. At first, the protagonist could not say what was wrong. Nothing obvious had changed. The house looked the same. The routines continued. Her smile was still there. And yet, something felt different. It began as a small unease, a sense that the air itself had shifted. Conversations felt slightly off, like words were landing a second too late. The rooms felt larger, even when nothing had moved. The protagonist noticed this difference and tried to ignore it, assuming it was stress, or fatigue, or imagination. They told themselves that life could not stay perfectly balanced forever. Small discomforts were normal. Feelings passed. Things settled. There was no reason to worry. But the feeling stayed. It appeared in quiet moments when there was nothing else to distract the mind. It surfaced when the protagonist watched her sit by the window, hands folded, eyes distant. It lingered when the house fell silent at night, heavier than before. The protagonist could not explain it, only sense it. Something was wrong, or something was ending. The idea felt dramatic, unreasonable. Endings belong to clear moments, to loud events, to visible changes. This was none of those things. This was subtle, gentle, almost polite. The protagonist began noticing time differently. Days seemed to move faster, slipping through their hands before they could grasp them. Moments passed without leaving marks. They caught themselves thinking, I should stay longer, and then not doing it. The quiet giver noticed the shift as well. She saw the uncertainty in the protagonist's eyes, the way their attention lingered on her just a bit longer. She did not speak about it. She had learned that naming fear only made it grow. She remained calm. She remained kind. But something in her movements had changed. She conserved energy now, without saying why. She chose stillness more often. She rested in ways she never used to. The protagonist watched these changes and felt a tightening in their chest. They wanted to ask questions, but the questions felt heavy, dangerous. Asking would mean acknowledging the feeling, and once acknowledged, it could not be ignored. So they stayed quiet. There were moments when the protagonist felt a strange pull toward the past. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. Old mornings, old laughter, small moments that once felt unimportant now returned with sharp clarity. These memories did not hurt yet, but they carried weight. Why now, the protagonist wondered. Why remember these things suddenly? They tried to shake the feeling off by staying busy, by filling time with tasks and noise. But the feeling followed them, patient and persistent. It waited for quiet moments and returned stronger each time. Sometime the protagonist felt it while watching her smile. The smile felt the same, but it did not reassure the way it used to. It felt fragile, like glass that might crack if touched too hard. The protagonist did not know why they thought this. They only knew the thought frightened them. They started noticing absence before it arrived. The way her voice sounded softer, the way her presence filled a room less completely, the way silence seemed to grow around her, even when she was there. This awareness did not come with understanding, it came with confusion. The protagonist did not know what they were sensing, only that something was moving, shifting, preparing to change. They began to feel protective in small, awkward ways, asking if she needed anything, suggesting rest, lingering in doorways. These gestures were clumsy, uncertain. The quiet giver accepted them with a smile, never questioning the change. "Are you okay?" the protagonist asked more often now. "Yes," she answered gently. Always yes. The answer no longer felt complete. The protagonist began to feel the weight of unasked questions. They felt them hovering between sentences, waiting. What are you thinking? Are you tired? Are you afraid? The questions pressed against their chest, but they did not speak them aloud. Fear has a way of disguising itself as patience. The feeling grew stronger at night. In the dark, without distractions, the protagonist sensed the future approaching faster than expected. They felt as if time was narrowing, closing in, though they could not say why. They started noticing how often she watched them, not with worry, but with attention, as if she were memorizing details. The way they spoke, the way they moved, the way they existed in space. The protagonist felt seen in a way that made them uncomfortable. They told themselves this was imagination, that nothing significant was happening, that life was simply entering a quieter phase. But quiet does not always mean calm. One afternoon, the protagonist caught themselves staring at her hands. They looked thinner, more fragile. The sight startled them. Hands that had always felt capable now looked tired. The realization struck without warning, sharp and unsettling. They looked away quickly, as if seeing too much might make something real. The feeling of approaching loss hovered at the edge of awareness. It did not name itself. It did not explain itself. It simply existed, growing heavier with each passing day. The protagonist did not yet understand what they were sensing. They only knew that something precious felt closer to leaving than staying. That time which once felt endless, now felt uncertain. They wished they could go back to believing everything was secure. That love was guaranteed, that tomorrow would always arrive unchanged. But that belief had cracked. Something felt different now, and even without understanding it, the protagonist felt the quiet fear of knowing that once something changes, it never fully returns to what it was before. Chapter 10. Words I Never Asked. Regret did not arrive as pain. It arrived as memory, quiet, persistent memory that surfaced without warning and refused to leave. The protagonist did not yet feel panic or sorrow. What they felt instead was a growing awareness of absence, of space where words should have been spoken long ago. It began with simple questions, questions that once felt unnecessary, now heavy with meaning. How was your day, really? What do you think about when you sit alone? Are you happy? The protagonist realized these questions had lived nearby for years, always available, always postponed. They remembered moments when she almost spoke, times when she paused at the edge of a sentence, eyes thoughtful, as if deciding whether to continue. The protagonist had filled these pauses quickly, afraid of silence, eager to move forward. They did not give her room to finish. At the time, it felt natural. Conversations were shared spaces, and silence felt awkward. Now, silence felt sacred, filled with things they had never allowed to surface. The protagonist began recalling stories she had hinted at, but never told fully. A childhood home she mentioned only once. A friendship she lost without explanation. A dream she laughed about and then dismissed. These fragments returned now, sharper than before. Why didn't I ask? The protagonist wondered. They had assumed there would always be time, that stories could be collected later, when life slowed down, when schedules opened, when urgency faded. They believed listening could wait. Regret grew not from one big mistake, but from many small choices. Each time they chose speed over presence. Each time they chose convenience over curiosity. Each time they believed that knowing someone did not require continuous effort. The quiet giver noticed the change. She saw the way the protagonist watched her now, eyes lingering, attention focused. She sensed the questions forming behind their eyes, but she did not invite them out. She had learned to protect others from heavy truths. She believed some things were easier left unsaid. If the protagonist had not asked before, she would not force the words now. The protagonist began asking different kinds of questions, safe ones. Do you need anything? Are you comfortable? Did you eat? These questions felt responsible, but they were not the ones that haunted them. They were practical, not personal. The questions that mattered most remained unspoken. What did you give up for me? What do you regret? What scared you when you were younger? What made you cry when no one was watching? The protagonist felt these questions press against their chest, demanding attention. But speaking them felt dangerous. They feared the answers. They feared what they might learn. They feared opening something that could not be closed again. So regret grew quietly. It appeared in unexpected places, while washing dishes, while driving alone, while hearing a song she once liked. The protagonist would think, I never asked why she loved this. I never asked how she felt about that day. They realized that knowing someone's routine is not the same as knowing their inner life. They knew what she cooked, when she woke up, how she moved through the house. They did not know what she carried inside. This realization did not come with blame. It came with sadness, a soft, aching sadness that did not demand tears, only attention. The quiet giver continued her days as before. She did not sense urgency, or perhaps she did, but chose not to share it. She believed love was shown through steadiness, not confession. Sometimes she looked at the protagonist with a tenderness that felt different now, as if she were holding something back, as if she were protecting a truth the protagonist was not ready to hear. The protagonist noticed this look and felt a tightening in their throat. They wanted to ask, "What are you thinking right now?" But the words stayed trapped behind caution. They remembered how often she had listened to them, how she had absorbed their worries, their complaints, their dreams. She had held space without asking for equal return. The imbalance felt clear now. Regret deepened when the protagonist realized that silence is also a choice. Not asking is a form of distance. Not listening fully is a kind of absence. They thought of all the nights she waited awake, all the mornings she prepared without comment, All the moments she made space for others to speak while she remained quiet. How many words had she swallowed, the protagonist wondered. The idea felt unbearable. There were days when the protagonist resolved to ask everything, to sit down and say, "Tell me about your life. Tell me about the parts I don't know. Tell me what you never said." These intentions felt strong in the moment, but when the moment arrived, fear intervened. Fear of making things uncomfortable, fear of opening wounds, fear of changing the fragile peace that still existed. So they waited. Regret does not shout. It waits patiently, growing stronger with time. It sharpens memory. It turns ordinary moments into missed opportunities. The protagonist began to feel the weight of all the words they never asked for. Words that now hovered in the air, unanswered, unanswerable. They realized too late that questions are a form of love, that asking is a way of saying, "I see you, I care, I want to know who you are beyond what you give me." The quiet giver had waited for those questions once. She had been ready, open, willing. Now she was quieter, more reserved, not closed but protected. The protagonist felt the loss of that openness, like a door slowly closing. They did not know when it had begun to close. They only knew that it was harder to open now. Some nights regret made sleep difficult. Thoughts circled endlessly. The protagonist imagined conversations that never happened, answers that would never be heard. They rehearsed questions in their mind, knowing they might never speak them aloud. Regret teaches slowly. It does not punish. It reveals. And what it revealed now was painful but clear. Love had been present all along. Opportunity had been present too. The only thing missing was the courage to ask. The protagonists understood this quietly without drama. They felt it settle into their chest, heavy and undeniable. Words they never asked still waited in the silence, and with each passing day, that silence felt louder than anything that had ever been said. Chapter 11. Love that started to hurt. Love changed its weight before it changed its shape. It did not disappear. It did not weaken. It grew heavier, pressing inward instead of reaching outward. The protagonist felt this shift slowly, like a hand resting on the chest. Firm enough to notice, gentle enough to ignore at first. Guilt arrived quietly. It did not accuse or shout. It whispered. It reminded. It replayed moments the protagonist once passed without thought. Guilt asked questions the protagonist could no longer avoid. Why didn't you stay longer? Why didn't you listen more closely? Why did you believe time would wait? Love, which once felt light and easy, now carried weight. It followed the protagonist through the day, settling into pauses, into stillness, into moments when there was nothing else to distract the mind. It felt different now, no longer comfortable, no longer automatic. The protagonist noticed how carefully they watched her. Every movement mattered. Every pause felt important. They studied her face for signs they once overlooked. Each smile brought relief and fear at the same time. Relief that she was still there. Fear that she was hiding something behind it. Guilt sharpened attention. It made memory vivid. The protagonist remembered how often they had chosen convenience over connection. How often they had said later without realizing what it cost. These memories did not scream. They simply stood there, undeniable. Love hurt because it was no longer innocent. The quiet giver noticed the change. She sensed the heaviness in the way the protagonist looked at her, the way concern followed her movements. She felt the shift in energy. the way attention now lingered where it once passed quickly. She did not want this. She did not want love to feel like burden or fear. She wanted it to feel warm, steady, free. She smiled more carefully now, choosing gentleness with intention, hoping to ease what she sensed growing inside the protagonist. The protagonist tried to help more. They offered assistance, suggested rest, hovered awkwardly. These gestures came from care, but they were uncertain, clumsy. They did not know how to give back what had been given so quietly for so long. "Sit down," the protagonist said once. "I'm okay," she replied, as always. The exchange felt incomplete. It left something unresolved in the air. Guilt deepened because love was still present. If love had vanished, grief might have followed quickly, cleanly. But love remained alive and breathing, making every moment feel fragile. The protagonist felt responsible for protecting something they had once taken for granted. They began to feel afraid of small things, afraid of silence, afraid of missed calls, afraid of moments when she retreated into herself. Each fear added weight to love, making it harder to carry. Love started to hurt because it was paired with awareness. Awareness of limits, awareness of time, awareness of all that had been overlooked. The quiet giver carried her own form of pain. She saw the guilt forming in the protagonist and wished she could take it away. She did not want to be the source of discomfort. She believed love should make life easier, not heavier. She hid her fatigue more carefully now. She rested only when alone. She saved her energy for moments she knew the protagonist would notice. She wanted their time together to feel normal, undisturbed. The protagonist sensed this effort and felt worse. Guilt grew from contrast, from remembering how light love once felt and realizing that lightness was built on unshared weight. Someone else had been carrying it all along. The protagonist began apologizing for things that had no clear reason. "Sorry I'm late. Sorry I forgot. Sorry I didn't ask." The words came out unevenly, awkwardly. She waved them away gently, but the apologies did not disappear. They stayed inside the protagonist, multiplying. Love hurt because it could no longer be expressed freely. Every word felt measured. Every action felt insufficient. The protagonist wanted to give something meaningful, something equal, but did not know how. They watched her hands more closely now. Hands that had always been busy, always capable. They noticed how thin they looked, how carefully they moved. The sight tightened the protagonist's throat. Love hurt because it demanded attention, and attention arrived too late. The quiet giver felt the ache too, though she did not name it. She felt the shift from being unnoticed to being watched, from quiet support to careful observation. She missed the ease of before, when love flowed without fear. She did not want to be a reminder of guilt. She wanted to be a source of comfort. So she continued smiling, continued being kind, continued offering warmth even when her own reserves felt low. Love to her meant continuing even when it cost something. The protagonist felt trapped between gratitude and regret. Gratitude for what still existed, regret for what had been neglected. The two emotions pulled in opposite directions, stretching love thin. Love hurt because it revealed imbalance, because it exposed how much had been taken without awareness, because it showed how much had been given without expectation. The protagonist realized that love is not only about affection, it is about responsibility. Responsibility to notice, to listen, to stay present. This responsibility felt heavy now, pressing down with every missed opportunity remembered. They began to fear the future, fear that time was shorter than they wanted to believe, fear that there would not be enough chances to make things right, fear that understanding had arrived too late. The quiet giver sensed this fear and tried to soften it. She spoke lightly. She joked gently. She reminded the protagonist to take care of themselves. She shifted focus away from herself whenever possible. She believed love meant reducing fear, not increasing it. But fear had already entered. It lived in the space between them, quiet but persistent. It changed the shape of love, making it sharper, more urgent. Love hurt because it was still alive, because it still mattered deeply, because losing it was now imaginable. The protagonist began to ache in ways they could not explain. A constant tightness, a low, steady sorrow that did not yet have a name. They carried it silently, unsure how to release it. They wanted to tell her how much she meant. They wanted to say things that felt too large, too late. The words gathered in their chest, heavy and unsaid. Love hurt because it demanded honesty, and honesty required courage. The protagonist was still learning to find. The quiet giver continued forward, gentle and patient. She did not know how much time remained, or perhaps she did. She chose not to share that knowledge. She believed love should be given freely, without fear of outcome. The protagonist stood beside her, love heavy in their chest, guilt woven through it, awareness burning softly beneath the surface. Love had started to hurt, and though nothing had ended yet, the ache told them clearly that something precious was already changing, and that love, once light and easy, would never feel the same again. Chapter 12. The Day She Was Gone. The day she was gone did not begin differently. Morning arrived as it always had, quiet and unremarkable. Light filtered through the window in the same gentle way. The house held its familiar shape. Nothing warned the protagonist that something permanent had already happened. At first, absence felt like delay. The quiet giver was not in the kitchen. The kettle was cold. The radio was silent. The protagonist assumed she had slept longer, or stepped outside, or was simply in another room. These explanations felt reasonable. They allowed the morning to continue without fear. The protagonist moved through the house, calling her name softly without urgency. There was no answer. Silence answered instead, settling into corners and hallways. Still, it did not feel like loss yet. It felt like a pause. They checked the bedroom. The bed was untouched, neatly made. The room looked exactly as it always did, calm and orderly, as if she might return at any moment. The sight was reassuring and unsettling at the same time. The protagonist felt a tightening in their chest, small but insistent. They told themselves not to imagine things. Fear felt dramatic. This was surely nothing. Time moved forward anyway. Hours passed without explanation. Calls went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. The absence began to take shape, becoming heavier, more defined. It pressed against the edges of thought, refusing to be ignored any longer. When the truth finally arrived, it did not come with sound. No sirens, no shouting, no collapse to the floor. It arrived quietly, carried by simple words spoken carefully, as if volume might break something fragile. She is gone. The words did not make sense at first. They hovered in the air, detached from reality. Gone felt temporary. Gone felt reversible. The protagonist waited for clarification that never came. The house did not react. The walls remained steady. The light stayed soft. Everything looked exactly as it had before. That was the cruelest part. The world did not acknowledge the loss. The protagonist stood still, uncertain how to move forward in a space that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every object felt misplaced, as if it no longer belonged. The absence was not loud. It did not demand tears. It simply existed, undeniable and complete. They walked into the kitchen again. The table was empty. One chair remained pulled back slightly, as if someone had stood up and never returned. The protagonist stared at it, unable to move it back into place. Loss did not arrive as emotion. It arrived as confusion. The quiet giver was missing from the smallest details. The cup that was never used, the light left on, the quiet hum that filled the space when she was present. These things were gone, leaving behind an echo that hurt more than sound. The protagonist expected pain to rush in, to overwhelm them. Instead, there was numbness, a strange calm that felt wrong. Their body continued functioning, following habit, even as something essential had disappeared. They sat down where she used to sit. The chair felt colder than expected. The space across from them felt vast, empty, unfinished. The protagonist realized with a dull ache that this space would never be filled in the same way again. Absence settled into routine. The day continued because days always do. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows shifted. Time refused to stop. The protagonist moved through the hours in fragments, sitting, standing, walking without destination. They touched objects she had used, half expecting warmth to remain. Everything felt untouched, preserved, as if waiting for her return. But she did not return. The house began to feel wrong, too quiet, too still. Silence pressed heavily now, no longer gentle. It filled rooms completely, leaving no space to breathe. The protagonist realized that loss did not announce itself. It did not ask permission. It arrived quietly and rearranged everything without effort. They found themselves listening for sounds that would never come. Footsteps, a cough, a soft laugh. Each time silence answered, sharper than before. The quiet giver's absence changed the shape of time. Moments stretched unbearably long, then collapsed without warning. The protagonist could not hold on to any sense of rhythm. Everything felt suspended, waiting for something impossible. They thought of all the ways they had prepared for dramatic loss. Final words, emotional goodbyes, clear endings. None of those existed here. There had been no warning, no conversation that felt like an ending. That was what hurt most. The day passed without ceremony, no gathering, no ritual, just the slow realization that she was not somewhere else. She was not resting. She was not waiting. She was gone. The protagonist felt the permanence settle in gradually, like cold seeping through walls. It did not overwhelm them all at once. It worked patiently, methodically, claiming space inch by inch. They sat on the floor at some point, unsure when or why. The house felt too large to stand in. The air felt heavy to breathe. Still, no tears came. Grief had not yet found its voice. Loss arrived softly, but it did not leave softly. As evening approached, the light changed, casting shadows she would never see again. The protagonist realized she would never comment on the weather, never remind them to eat, never sit quietly beside them again. These realizations came one by one, each one cutting gently but deeply. The day she was gone did not feel like an ending. It felt like a removal, like something essential had been taken out of the world without explanation, leaving everything else to adjust around the empty space. The protagonist understood finally that absence could be louder than presence, that silence could carry more weight than words. They remained there, in the quiet, surrounded by things she had touched, things she had cared for, things that now felt fragile. The house held its breath. Nothing dramatic happened. No final moment demanded attention. No sound marked the transition. There was only absence, and the knowledge that absence, once it arrives, does not leave. Chapter 13. The Things She Left Behind. The days after she was gone blurred together, but the house remained painfully clear. Every room felt preserved, untouched, as if she might return at any moment. The protagonist moved slowly now, carefully, afraid that touching things might erase something important. It was in the quiet that the things she left behind began to speak. At first, they were ordinary objects: a folded sweater resting on the back of a chair, a pair of shoes placed neatly by the door, a cup she had washed and left upside down to dry. These items had always existed, but now they felt heavier, filled with meaning they never carried before. The protagonist picked up the sweater and pressed it to their chest. It still held her shape, the way her shoulders curved, the way her arms rested. The smell was faint but familiar: soap, warmth, home. The realization struck hard and sudden. She had chosen this sweater that morning. She had planned to wear it again. Grief tightened its grip. In a drawer near the kitchen, the protagonist found notes, small pieces of paper folded carefully, written in her gentle handwriting. Reminders, lists, instructions meant for no one in particular. Buy bread, water the plants, call tomorrow. The word tomorrow appeared often, scattered across different pages. Tomorrow never came. There were notes tucked into unexpected places, one behind a photo frame, one inside a book she rarely opened. These notes were not dramatic. They did not explain anything. They simply existed. Quiet proof of her attention to detail, her need to keep life running smoothly. The protagonist realized she had been preparing even when no one noticed. In a small box hidden beneath folded cloth, they found letters. The sight of them made their hands shake. Envelopes addressed in her careful script, each one marked with a date. Some were old, some were recent. All of them had been sealed and never given. The protagonist hesitated before opening the first one. It felt wrong, like stepping into a space meant to remain private. But curiosity mixed with longing, and longing won. The letter did not begin with sadness. It began with care. She wrote about ordinary things, about mornings, about small joys, about watching the protagonist grow without realizing when it happened. Her words were simple, steady, familiar. As the protagonist read, understanding settled slowly. These letters were not written in panic. They were written patiently over time. She had been speaking all along, just not out loud. In one letter, she apologized for things the protagonist never knew she carried, for being quiet, for not saying when she was tired, for choosing silence too often. She wrote that she did not want to worry anyone, that love to her meant protection. The protagonist felt the weight of every hidden choice. Another letter spoke of dreams she never followed, paths she did not take because responsibility came first. She did not express regret. She simply named the truth, calmly as if acknowledging weather. This was the life she chose, she wrote, and she did not resent it. That sentence broke something open inside the protagonist. She had given up pieces of herself without asking to be thanked. Objects around the house began to feel different now. Each one became a message. The neatly organized shelves, the clean corners, the careful placement of everyday items. All of it spoke of a woman who loved through action, not words. The protagonist noticed how everything had been arranged with others in mind. Convenience, comfort, order. She had shaped the environment to make life easier for those she loved, even when it made things harder for herself. In the bedroom, the protagonist found more notes, gentle reminders written to herself. Rest, drink water, take your medicine. The sight of these words brought a sharp wave of guilt. She had been caring for herself quietly, without burdening anyone. How much had she hidden, the protagonist wondered. There were small objects that carried enormous weight. A worn wallet with old photos tucked inside. A notebook filled with recipes she never wrote down anywhere else. A calendar marked with important dates that were not her own. Each item revealed a layer of love that had gone unnoticed. The protagonist sat on the floor surrounded by these things, overwhelmed by their meaning. She had lived so carefully, so thoughtfully, without asking for recognition. Everything she left behind told the same story. She loved deeply. She endured quietly. The letters continued. In one, she wrote directly to the protagonist, though she never intended it to be read this way. She spoke of pride, of gratitude, of watching them become someone strong. She wrote that even on days she felt weak, that pride gave her strength. Tears finally came. The protagonist realized that while they had worried about saying the wrong thing, she had been carrying everything alone. While they hesitated to ask questions, she had already written the answers, patiently waiting. The objects around them were no longer silent. They spoke of sacrifice disguised as routine, of love hidden inside normal days, of care given without expectation. She had left behind more than belongings. She had left behind evidence, evidence of how deeply she loved, evidence of how much she hid, evidence of a life shaped by quiet devotion. The protagonist understood now that love does not always ask to be seen. Sometimes it works quietly in the background, trusting that its meaning will be understood eventually. But understanding had come too late. Holding one of the letters close, the protagonist felt the ache of realization settle fully. She had been speaking all along, through notes, through objects, through the careful way she lived. The things she left behind were not reminders of absence. They were proof of presence that had always been there. And now, with every letter opened and every object touched, the protagonist felt love more clearly than ever before, even as the pain of knowing it fully only arrived after she was gone. Chapter 14. The Truth She Never Spoke. The truth did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like fabric pulled gently apart, revealing what had always been there. The protagonist did not discover it through a single sentence or moment. They discovered it through accumulation, through weight, through the quiet understanding that settled deep in the chest and refused to move. She had loved without language. That realization came first, simple and devastating. She had loved in ways that did not demand response, recognition, or return. She had loved through action, through patience, through silence chosen again and again. The protagonist saw this clearly now, and the clarity hurt more than confusion ever had. They remembered how she rarely spoke about herself, how questions directed at her often turned into concern for someone else, how she redirected attention effortlessly as if her own inner world was something to be protected from view. At the time, this felt natural. Now it felt intentional. She had been careful, careful not to interrupt, careful not to burden, careful not to take up space that might belong to someone else. Love for her was not something you declared. It was something you practiced quietly every day. The protagonist thought of all the moments when she could have spoken. Moments when pain showed briefly before being smoothed away. Moments when fatigue slowed her movements and truth hovered just behind her eyes. She had chosen silence in each of those moments, not because she had nothing to say, but because she believed silence was kinder. This understanding changed everything. The protagonist realized that her quiet was not emptiness. It was fullness held back. She had carried thoughts, fears, memories, and hopes alone so that others could move freely, unburdened by her weight. They loved me in ways I never learned to see. The sentence formed slowly, painfully, as if the mind resisted its own conclusion. The protagonist repeated it internally, testing its truth, feeling it settle deeper each time. She had loved through restraint, through absence of demand, through making herself smaller so others could feel larger. The protagonist saw now that this love required strength they had never acknowledged. They remembered how she never asked to be thanked, how she brushed off concern, how she minimized her needs with practiced ease. These were not signs of lack. They were signs of choice. She had chosen to protect others from her reality. The letters, the notes, the objects left behind all pointed to the same truth. She had known more than she said. She had felt more than she shared. She had worried, hoped, feared, and dreamed quietly, without witnesses. The protagonist felt a wave of grief that went beyond loss. It was grief for a person they never fully met, for a life that existed alongside theirs, unseen. They had lived together, shared space, shared days. And yet, a whole world had remained hidden, not because it was locked away, but because no one insisted on entering it. She had waited, waited for questions that never came, waited for pauses long enough to hold truth, waited for moments when it felt safe to speak. And when those moments did not arrive, she adapted instead. The protagonist understood now that love can be invisible by design, that some people love by removing themselves from the center of the story. That care can be expressed by what is not said, by what is absorbed quietly. This realization broke something open inside them. They felt the full weight of imbalance, of how much had been received without being noticed, of how much had been given without expectation. The love that once felt normal now felt immense, overwhelming in its depth. She had loved even when it cost her, loved when she was tired, loved when she was afraid, loved when she was alone in her thoughts, loved without ever saying, "This is hard for me." The protagonist felt shame, sharp and burning. Not the shame of wrongdoing, but the shame of ignorance, of having been present but not attentive, of having shared life without truly seeing the person beside them. They realized that asking questions is not curiosity alone. It is recognition. It is a way of saying, your inner life matters. And by not asking, they had unknowingly accepted her silence as preference, not sacrifice. She had never spoken the truth because she believed love meant endurance, because she believed others mattered more, because she trusted that what she gave would be enough, even if unseen. The protagonist wished desperately that she had spoken anyway, that she had interrupted, that she had insisted. But wishing did not change the past. It only deepened the ache. They imagined what she might have said if she had spoken freely, about fear, about loneliness, about moments when she felt invisible. These imagined words pressed painfully against the protagonist's heart, heavy with possibility. The truth she never spoke was not one sentence. It was a life shaped by quiet devotion, by choices made daily to put others first, by love that did not announce itself or ask to be admired. The protagonist understood now that love does not always arrive with warmth and ease. Sometimes it arrives disguised as normalcy, as routine, as silence that feels comfortable until it is gone. They felt the urge to speak to her, to tell her they finally understood. But understanding arrived too late to be shared. The room felt too small for the realization. The air felt thick with unsaid things. The protagonist sat with the weight of it, unable to move, unable to escape the truth settling fully into their body. She had loved them completely, and they had loved her too, but blindly. The pain of this truth did not come from loss alone. It came from recognition, from seeing clearly what had always been there, and knowing that clarity could no longer change anything. The protagonists felt themselves break in quiet pieces, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, the way something precious breaks inside, changing shape forever. They whispered the truth aloud, finally giving it voice, though no one was there to hear it. You loved me in ways I never learned to see. The words did not bring relief. They brought finality, because once seen, the truth could not be unseen. And once understood, love could no longer be light or easy or simple. It would always carry this knowledge now, that she had loved fully, that she had spoken through silence, and that by the time the truth was understood, she was no longer there to hear that it had finally been seen. Chapter 15. Grief in Small Moments. Grief did not arrive as a storm. It came as a whisper, soft enough to doubt, persistent enough to stay. Life continued, because life always does, but it moved differently now. Slower in some places, sharper in others. Everything felt familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The protagonist woke up each morning expecting the day to feel normal. The body remembered routine before the mind remembered loss. For a brief moment, everything felt unchanged. Then memory returned, quiet and precise, settling into place with practiced ease. Grief lived in small moments, in reaching for an extra cup without thinking, in pausing before speaking, then remembering there was no one to answer, in noticing silence where sound once lived. These moments did not scream. They simply existed. The house continued its rhythm, but the rhythm felt hollow. Floors still creaked. Light still shifted across walls. Time moved forward without permission. The protagonist moved through days with careful steps, unsure how much weight the world could hold. People spoke kindly. They offered words meant to comfort. The protagonist listened, nodded, thanked them. These exchanges felt distant, like conversations held through glass. Grief made everything quieter, as if sound itself had learned restraint. There were moments when the protagonist almost felt fine, when laughter surfaced unexpectedly, when a task demanded full attention. These moments brought guilt along with relief. Feeling okay felt like betrayal, even though nothing had been promised. Grief whispered reminders in ordinary places, in grocery aisles, in empty rooms. In moments of rest when the mind wandered freely, it spoke gently but clearly, reminding the protagonist that something essential was missing. Time felt strange now. Some hours stretched endlessly, filled with heaviness and thought. Others disappeared without notice. The protagonist lost track of days, of dates, of schedules. Grief did not care for order. They found themselves holding objects without reason. A mug, a blanket, a piece of paper. Touch became grounding, a way to remain present when thoughts drifted too far inward. The physical world offered quiet support. Grief did not demand tears constantly. Tears arrived without warning, triggered by simple things. A smell, a phrase, a memory passing briefly through the mind. The tears were not dramatic. They came and went like rain, leaving everything slightly heavier afterward. The protagonist noticed how grief changed their attention. They listened more closely now. They watched details they once ignored. Life felt fragile, as if everything required care. They moved gently, afraid of breaking something unseen. The quiet giver's absence reshaped space. Chairs felt larger, rooms felt emptier. The protagonist avoided some places entirely, not ready to sit where she once sat, not ready to face the outline she left behind. Grief also softened things. It made the protagonist kinder, more patient, more aware. They noticed others more easily now. They heard pain behind words, silence behind smiles. Grief taught them to listen differently. There were moments when grief felt like companionship, a steady presence that reminded them of love. These moments were confusing. Missing her hurt, but remembering her also felt like connection. Grief held both at once. The protagonist learned that grief does not move in a straight line. Some days felt manageable. Others felt unbearable without explanation. Progress was uneven. Healing did not announce itself. Life asked for participation anyway. Meals needed preparation. Work required attention. The protagonist moved through these tasks carefully, aware that routine was both necessary and exhausting. Grief sat quietly beside them, never leaving. They noticed how the world continued without her. The sky changed. Seasons shifted. People laughed. This continuity felt unfair and comforting at the same time. The world had not ended, even though something precious had. Grief whispered in moments of stillness, late at night, early in the morning. It spoke when there was nothing else to listen to. It reminded the protagonist of everything that had been shared and everything that had been missed. They did not fight the grief. Fighting felt pointless. Instead, they learned to sit with it, to let it exist without explanation. Grief did not need to be solved. It needed space. The protagonist began to understand that grief was not an enemy. It was a response to love. It existed because something meaningful had existed. This understanding did not lessen the pain, but it gave it shape. Some days grief felt like exhaustion. Other days like longing. Sometimes it felt like quiet gratitude. It changed form often, never settling into one shape for long. The protagonist realized that grief was teaching them how to live differently, more slowly, more honestly, with attention. Grief was rewriting priorities without asking permission. Life continued, but everything felt different now. The difference was subtle, constant, woven into every moment. Grief did not announce itself loudly. It whispered, reminding the protagonist that love does not end when presence does. Grief became part of the landscape of living, not something to overcome, but something to carry. And in those small moments where grief rested quietly beside life, the protagonist began, without realizing it, to learn how to keep going while still holding what had been lost. Chapter 16, Carrying Her Forward. Living after loss did not mean leaving her behind. The protagonist learned this slowly. through practice rather than intention. At first, survival was the only goal. Days were managed, tasks were completed. Life moved forward out of necessity, not choice. But beneath that movement, something quieter began to form. They started to live differently, not dramatically, not with sudden transformation. The change showed itself in pace, in attention, in the way moments were handled. The protagonist moved slower now, as if time itself deserved respect. Rushing felt wrong, almost careless, like repeating an old mistake. They woke earlier, not because they had to, but because mornings felt meaningful again. Silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of presence. They sat with tea longer, noticing warmth, noticing breath, noticing the light as it entered the room. These moments felt like conversations without words. They listened more carefully to people. They stopped interrupting. They allowed pauses to exist without filling them. Silence became a space of permission rather than discomfort. In those pauses, the protagonist felt her influence most clearly. They remembered how she listened. Kindness also changed shape. It became deliberate. The protagonist chose gentler words, even when frustration surfaced. They asked questions and waited for real answers. They noticed exhaustion in others and did not look away. Kindness was no longer instinctive comfort. It was conscious care. They began helping without being asked. Small things, quiet things, folding something carefully, waiting without complaint, remembering details others forgot. These acts felt familiar, almost inherited, as if muscle memory had been passed down through love. At first, these behaviors surprised them. Then they felt right. The protagonist realized they were not trying to replace her. They were continuing something she had started, carrying forward a way of being in the world that valued gentleness over speed, attention over efficiency. Grief did not disappear as this change took hold. It remained present, but it softened. It became less sharp, less consuming. Grief transformed into guidance, shaping decisions without overwhelming them. They found themselves thinking, what would she do here? Not as a rule, but as a compass. The question grounded them. It reminded them of patience, of restraint, of choosing care even when it cost something. Love, once heavy with guilt, began to settle into something steadier. It did not erase regret, but it reframed it. The protagonist understood that love could not be repaid backward. It could only be carried forward. They spoke her name more often now, not in pain, but in remembrance, in stories shared quietly, in moments when her influence felt near. Saying her name no longer broke them, it connected them. The protagonist noticed that others responded to this change. Conversations deepened, trust grew, people lingered longer. The world seemed to slow slightly in response, as if recognizing the shift. They were more present now, fully in moments, fully with people. Distraction felt like a form of absence they no longer wanted to practice. Being present became an act of respect, a promise to notice while there was still time. There were days when the old pace tempted them, when rushing felt easier, when care felt heavy. On those days, they remembered how much she had carried without complaint. The memory steadied them. They allowed themselves rest without guilt. Rest no longer felt like failure. It felt like balance. They understood now that strength did not come from endurance alone. It came from knowing when to stop. Love became legacy not because it was spoken, but because it was lived. The protagonist began to see her influence everywhere, in how they arranged spaces, in how they prepared food, in how they waited for others. These actions did not feel performative. They felt natural, as if love had rewritten instinct. They realized that her life had been a lesson, taught quietly over years. A lesson about presence, about restraint, about devotion without demand. They had not recognized it while she was alive, but they carried it now, fully aware. Some evenings, the protagonist sat alone and spoke to her softly, not expecting answers, not asking forgiveness, simply sharing the day. These moments felt intimate, peaceful. Love no longer felt interrupted by absence. They understood now that loving someone does not end when they leave. Love changes shape. It becomes movement. It becomes habit. It becomes choice. The protagonist no longer feared forgetting her. Forgetting was impossible. She lived in them now, not as memory alone, but as behavior, as values, as way of being. They moved through the world with gentler steps. They made room for others. They stayed longer. They listened deeper. These choices felt like continuation, not imitation. Her love had not vanished. It had transferred. This understanding brought a quiet kind of peace. Not happiness, not closure, but steadiness. A sense that something meaningful had been preserved, even as loss remained. The protagonist accepted that pain and gratitude could exist together, that grief and purpose could share the same space, that healing did not mean forgetting what hurt. They carried her forward in small moments, in patience, in kindness, in attention given freely. They carried her forward not as weight, but as guidance. Life continued, shaped by what had been learned too late, but not too late to live by. Love had changed them, and through that change, she remained present. Not in the house, not in objects, not in letters, but in the way the protagonist now chose to live. That was how they carried her forward. Moral lesson and explanation. Today's moral is simple but not easy. Love is often silent, and by the time we hear it, it may already be gone. Many people think love must be loud to be real. They expect love to explain itself, to ask for attention, to demand time. But this story shows another kind of love, a quiet love, a love that works in the background, a love that shows itself through action, patience, and sacrifice, not through words. In this story, love did not say, "Look at me." It said, "I will take care of this." It did not ask, "Do you see me?" It asked, "Are you okay?" This is why it is easy to miss. The quiet giver loved without complaining. She loved by waiting, remembering, preparing, and protecting. She believed that love meant making life easier for others, even if it made her own life harder. Because of this, her love felt normal, safe, guaranteed, and that is why it was overlooked. The painful truth is this: we often notice love only when it stops, when the voice is gone, when the routine breaks, when the silence becomes too loud. This book is not meant to create guilt. Guilt does not help love grow. Awareness does. So here is the gentle lesson. If someone in your life listens more than they speak, notice them. If someone always adapts so you do not have to, pause. If someone gives without asking, look closer. Ask questions now, not later. Stay a little longer. Listen without rushing to reply. Love does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be present. And if you are someone who loves quietly, this message is also for you. Your love matters. Your needs matter. You do not have to disappear to be kind. Let yourself be seen, even a little. This story ends, but life does not. You still have time. Time to notice. Time to speak. Time to listen. If this book made you think of someone, that is not an accident. Carry that feeling with you. Let it guide how you love from now on. Love is often silent, but today you heard it. Do not wait to listen again. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you are here, it means you read slowly, with feeling, and allowed these quiet moments to sit with you. That matters. Before you close this book, I want to leave you with a gentle thought. Somewhere in your life, there may be a quiet giver, someone who listens more than they speak, someone who adjusts so you do not have to, someone whose love feels so normal that it almost disappears. Please notice them today. You do not need perfect words. You do not need a long speech. Sit with them. Ask one real question. Listen without checking the time. Let your presence be the gift. And if you are the quiet giver in someone else's life, remember this too. Your care is not invisible, even if it feels that way. Your kindness has weight. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to be heard. Stories end, but attention continues. Carry this one with you into ordinary days. Let it soften how you move, how you speak, how you love. Thank you for reading with an open heart. Close the book and go notice someone who loves quietly.